Tonight, conditional meeting. The president agrees in principle to a summit with Russian leader Vladimir Putin, with the fate of Ukraine on the line.
Ukraine has a gun to its head while the Russians are negotiating with the Americans and NATO and others.
Plus, sexually explicit material showing up in public school libraries.
This is in our schools.
And remembering the founding father.
When we look at George Washington, we're clearly looking at the great icon of our country, the United States.
On this President's Day.
All this and more tonight on Faith Nation.
Eastern Europe on the brink of war as Russia attempts to redraw the boundaries of Ukraine. Welcome to Faith Nation Washington. I'm John Jessup.
And I'm Jenna Bratter. Thank you for joining us. Well, tonight, Russia is one step closer to war in eastern Ukraine. President Putin announcing the independence of Luhansk and Donetsk, two Russian-backed separatist republics in Ukraine.
That is right. The latest geopolitical move, disguised as an olive branch, creates open doorways for Russian troops to enter Ukraine in the Donbass region. American intelligence warns this could create a pretext for war. Meanwhile, President Putin says pressure from the West and Soviet history warrant his decision.
Считаю необходимым принять уже давно назревшее решение. Незамедлительно признать независимость и суверенитет Донецкой Народной Республики и Луганской Народной Республики.
The United States warns of an extremely violent attack in the coming hours or days. President Biden has agreed to meet Vladimir Putin for a summit only if there is no attack on Ukraine. Russian forces, though, remain poised for an incursion with an estimated 200,000 soldiers surrounding Ukraine's border. Intelligence reports also indicate Russia has compiled a list of Ukrainians to be killed or sent to camps after an invasion.
And joining us from Lviv, Ukraine, CBN News senior international correspondent George Thomas. Putin today, George, declaring the separatist republics of Luhansk and Donetsk as independent states. We heard from Putin himself this afternoon. What did you make of his speech and this bold declaration?
Yeah, I got on the phone just moments before coming on the air to talk with a gentleman who is a philosopher, a philosophy professor, runs an NGO, and was pursuing another doctorate degree, but has decided to put that on hold and to take up arms. And he's joined thousands of others, basic laymen, civilians, who are getting ready to defend their nation. He told me tonight that George, diplomacy has failed, and they are gearing up to protect their beloved country. This, in essence, according to one Ukrainian member of parliament, is an act of war because it goes beyond just what the Russian separatists currently hold. In essence, what Vladimir Putin said tonight is that the entire Donbass, Donetsk, Luhansk region are two independent states that belong to Russia.
George, President Putin, it appears, is putting forward what could be the false pretext for war. Another thing we heard today is there is a threat that Ukraine will try to retake Crimea. Is there any truth to that? And if they do, is there any way that they can possibly retake Crimea from Russia?
Okay, so John, just help me understand this. In 8 years, Ukraine basically did not face an army except for the thousands of, separatist troops on the east. Suddenly, they have 200,000 plus Russian forces surrounding their country. And so right now, Ukrainians are trying to retake Crimea. Are you kidding? That's a false narrative. Absolutely. Tonight, they said that there was an attack in the Donetsk region, very close to one of the headquarters of the separatist movement. Earlier today, they said that a tank allegedly belonging to the Ukrainians was blown up. Incidentally, it's all green. It's supposed to be February and it's wintertime. And the video is of green foliage. clearly we have seen over and over and over, and I've been telling you guys, this is part of the Russian playbook. They did it in Chechnya. They did it in Georgia in 2014. They did it again in 2018 in the eastern part of the country. And tonight they're doing it again, in essence, by declaring these two states as independent, sovereign, independent states. They're basically saying that we have every right to go in and to take that territory beyond the dotted line. I think the big question we're going to see is how is President Zelensky of Ukraine going to respond to what, in essence, is a grab of more land by the Ukrainians, even though they haven't done it yet. But I think everybody's going to wait to see how Zelensky responds.
Him and the rest of the world, will Putin be allowed to get away with this? The U.S. warning an invasion could be just hours away, George. If we do see that happen, are you expecting a full-scale invasion or more of a limited incursion?
Well, I think, I mean, most of the focus is going to be in the east, no doubt about it. You see the concentration of Russian forces. It's primarily there. I think there is some concern among military experts that most of the Ukrainian forces are also contained in the eastern part of the country. So I think that is a big concern. But I think we're looking at an incursion. My anticipation is at an incursion from the east, and then seeing how the Russian operation goes. Maybe Putin becomes a little bit more of a risk taker and heads for Kyiv.
George, I wonder, you're there on the ground. You've been there for a little time now. Does today's declaration at all change the mood of Ukrainians? They have seemed to be pretty united and defiant, those who are leaning towards the Western desire to become part of NATO, to become part of the European Union. Does this change the mood? Do they become more nervous of a real full-scale war on the verge of possibly happening?
Yeah, absolutely. This absolutely changes the calculus. I mean, I think up until now, there was a sense of denial. I think some of it also, you look at President Zelensky's tact in the last several months. He's being cool and composed. When he made that speech in Munich, Germany this weekend, he was, he came out defiant, in essence, telling the world that he, even if he doesn't get any help from the allies, that he is going to defend, and the people of Ukraine are going to defend their sovereign territory. So clearly, things have dramatically escalated with the multiple ceasefire agreements that have basically been dislodged in the last 72 hours. Repeated attacks by the Russians. Things have dramatically escalated, and clearly, you get a sense by tonight's announcement that this puts Ukraine front and center in the eyes of the Kremlin. And the Ukrainians are, as I talked to the person today, they're gearing up.
Yeah. All right, George Thomas in Lviv, Ukraine for us this evening. George, thank you so much. Great reporting.
Thanks.
Well, the COVID-19 case numbers continue to fall across the country. This as health officials reveal emerging data of a new subvariant of Omicron. And tonight, new revelations from the New York Times. The CDC is not publishing large portions of the COVID data it collects. 2 years into the pandemic, the agency leading the U.S. response to the coronavirus has published only a tiny fraction of the data it's collected, according to the Times. That report adding the CDC is withholding critical data on boosters, hospitalizations, and until recently, even wastewater data.
Well, here with us now is Nathan Gonzalez, editor and publisher of Inside Elections. Nathan, welcome back to Faith Nation. Per the Times report that Jenna was just referencing, the CDC was essentially withholding information concerned that the data might be misinterpreted, particularly among anti-vaccine groups, perhaps out of concern that it would bolster their skepticism of the efficacy of the vaccines. Nathan, first of all, your thoughts on that reporting overall, and then secondly, if true, do you think that Americans will be able to trust what had been the preeminent leader in public health, the CDC?
Well, first of all, how'd that go for the CDC? I mean, how'd that go to withhold information in hope that people didn't misuse the information? I mean, I think this is terrible. I mean, this is bad news. I mean, it's bad news that we have to remember that pre-COVID, people already were skeptical of institutions. And then now that we're this far and we're 2 years into a pandemic and we get this story from the New York Times, it just creates even more distrust. And so you asked if people could ever, trust the CDC ever again, essentially. And there might be a small group of people who do, but I think that the credibility is lost. And what the better way to do it, not being a epidemiologist, is to give out more information, but put it in proper context. Give people the tools to know how to use the information in order to make the best decision for their lives and for their family.
Nathan, changing gears here, today we heard from Russia's Vladimir Putin. Tonight, the White House is imposing more sanctions in response to his fiery speech. There was talk about a possible summit between President Biden and Putin. Is that off the table at this point?
Well, we'll see if it happens. I mean, it appears to be contingent on Russia not moving further into Ukraine. I guess I started skeptical. And this is a difficult. President Biden is in a difficult spot. I think if he doesn't try diplomacy until the end, he'll get blamed. If he does try diplomacy and it doesn't work, he'll get blamed for a portion of it. And absent there being some sort of summit and 200,000 Russian troops immediately, doing a 180 and going back, I don't see how Biden really gains a lot from this situation. I think it's just about, what is the best decision for the country, for our military, and particularly those men and women that are serving.
Conservatives, Nathan, are gearing up for the annual CPAC conference in Florida. Republican critics, though, former President Trump planned to meet right here in Washington for what they call counter-programming for what's called the Principles First Summit. Nathan, what do you make of that effort, not just to upstage the event, but really to rally Republicans opposed to Donald Trump in this midterm election year?
I think those are still the anti-Trump part of the Republican Party is still a small fraction of the Republican Party. I think President Trump is still the leader of the Republican Party as we know it right now, and CPAC is a great place to see who is in his good graces or who is in the good graces of the Trump GOP. I thought there's one interesting piece that Matt Schlapp, who's the head of the American Conservative Union that puts on CPAC, he was just on Steve Bannon's War Room show a couple days ago. He said that he actually doesn't use the word conservative anymore or talk about the conservative movement. It's about being Americans and about the founding of the country. So that kind of blew my mind that maybe we should pay attention that the people that are putting on CPAC and head of the American Conservative Union aren't using the word conservative anymore, and think about what that means for the future of the party. Because right now, when we talk about ideological fights within the Republican Party, it's not really about issues. It's about loyalty to President Trump or loyalty to what happened in the 2020 election. It's not really about the issues that we were talking about before President Trump came onto the scene.
All right, Nathan Gonzalez of Inside Elections. Nathan, thank you so much. It's great to see you.
Thank you, guys.
Coming up, parents up in arms over what they say amounts to pornography in schools. Explicit books available to children as young as kindergartners. This next story is hard to believe. Books containing sexually explicit material are available to children as young as kindergartners in some public school libraries.
As you might imagine, parents are up in arms challenging educators at school board meetings across the country. CBN's Tara Mergener reports on what's in these books and the controversy surrounding them.
Parents first started packing school board meetings hoping to reopen schools. Now the focus is on what they call explicit books. Child experts are also weighing in, saying graphic images and mature subject matter harms young minds.
Imagine your 11-year-old child or grandchild reading this.
A familiar school board scene playing out across the country.
So not only do you have to be talented, long-lasting, multiple, but you have to be okay, a sexy 18-year-old.
An uncomfortable crowd cringing.
Do you think you have to? People,
wait, this
people don't have a
is in
choice.
Our schools. Our kids are reading this, and you're going to tell me I can't read it to you because it's inappropriate?
It's being broadcast.
Everybody.
As steamy excerpts are read aloud from books now available in public schools.
Teenage girl getting raped. And this is available for 11-years.
Parents accusing educators of exposing their children to X-rated material.
Protect our children or get out of the way.
I think it's been hidden from a lot of parents. The shutdowns allowed parents to actually see and hear some of the content that was being discussed in classrooms.
That content includes books like Gender Queer, recipient of an American Library Award.
It's a story about my own life, about coming out as queer and non-binary and asexual.
The story contains graphic text and illustrations depicting men having intercourse, children engaged in sexual acts, and the sexual fantasies of the then 14-year-old author.
They want to normalize the abnormal, right? Any idea of sexual boundaries, any sort of idea of sexual right and wrong, morality, they want those knocked down.
Now that this and other examples are being found in more school libraries, outcry is growing louder among parents.
I don't understand what's going on. I don't understand how we have better criteria to select these books.
And politicians vowing to prosecute Texas and South Carolina's Republican governors, demanding investigations into how books like Gender Queer got into school libraries. Virginia's new governor is using executive orders to give parents more power to reclaim control over what their children are taught. There are numerous efforts underway to recall school board members across the country. Some parents even running for political office, like Brandon Michon.
Brandon Michon had the guts to fight for his kids.
Known for his viral rant against school shutdowns.
Figure it out!
And stunned when his kindergartner brought home a book on transgenderism.
Kindergartner is just trying to learn. Adult decisions and adult viewpoints and agendas are pushed down at a young age. That's not right.
All we're trying to do is allow parents to say it's okay for my children to see this.
Resistance is also rising to removing these books. Last month, Virginia Senate Democrats unanimously blocked a bill that would have forced schools to warn parents about sexual content.
It's a serious infringement on First Amendment rights.
Library groups are also speaking out.
We firmly believe in the right of individuals, including young people, to make choices about what they read, and we trust the choices of the school librarians and what they add to their collection.
Members of the LGBTQ community argue it's about social justice and inclusion.
And they can personalize it, how important this book is to them, why it matters.
Still, many experts insist what matters most is the children, warning this content for young audiences can have serious consequences.
It's literally a disaster for developing brains. When they watch something that is so explicit and so stimulating, it actually begins to wear out the pleasure centers in their brain, and it leaves them more vulnerable to addiction and depression.
Among other concerns, the children who view abusive and misogynistic acts will see them as normal and acceptable.
And it begins to shape their experience and perception of what it means to be in relationship with someone else. And then it opens up experiences with things that maybe they would have never been exposed to in such an explicit way at an early age. And it begins to shape their behavior towards other people.
It's clear sexual and gender ideology is quickly becoming another flashpoint in education wars, with children caught in the crossfire.
As the debate plays out, parents are encouraged to foster healthy relationships with their children, talk to them about sexuality early in an age-appropriate way, and let them know it's okay to ask questions. In Loudoun County, Virginia, I'm Tara Merchiner, CBN News.
On this President's Day, remembering the Founding Fathers. Up next, the extraordinary life and faith of George Washington.
Well, welcome back. Today is President's Day, the national holiday honoring U.S. presidents. And along those lines, a new documentary sheds light on the extraordinary life and faith of George Washington.
Yeah, our first commander-in-chief and the father of our country. Well, I spoke with the man behind the documentary. Take a look.
When we look at George Washington, we're clearly looking at the great icon of our country, the United States.
George Washington, one in a 7-part documentary series produced by the Providence Forum.
A man who has given his name to our capital city. He was called the father of his country in his own lifetime. He has been called by historians the indispensable man. They look to Washington as a general.
Author and executive director Jerry Newcomb.
The purpose of this series, which is called the Foundation of American Liberty series, and if anybody asks me, well, what's the foundation of American liberty? It's our Judeo-Christian heritage. It's the fact that our founders said that our rights come from the Creator, and that has been the source of America's greatness. And George Washington, as a man, was indispensable in helping create America.
George Washington really was that man we see kneeling beside his horse, praying.
Our first commander-in-chief who led a ragtag army of farmers and merchants to defeat the strongest military in the world. And when he had the chance to rule, he pushed power away, refusing to be king.
A particular example was one of a handful, which were very important examples of George Washington choosing the Christian type of leadership, servant leadership.
And Newcomb adds, God placed his hand on Washington early in life.
In 1755, when he was a young man in his 20s, and he was an American officer in the British Army during the French and Indian War. And there was a massacre that occurred in which all the officers on the American and the British side were killed except one, and that was George Washington. And it wasn't because they didn't try. They actually tried. They even aimed their guns at him. And by God's grace, he was spared. He had horses shot out from under him. He had 4 bullet holes in his cloak. He had to actually write his brother, John Augustine, and send a letter saying, you may have heard that I died. I didn't, by God's grace.
And for more information on this documentary, including on where you can watch it, visit cbnnews.com and click on this story. And we will be right back. Finally tonight, it's been 75 years since Jackie Robertson broke the color baseline when he started at first base for the Brooklyn Dodgers in 1947.
And now you can buy a piece of that history for yourself. One fan's admiration for number 42 prompted a lifelong venture accumulating, get this, more than 20,000 pieces of African-American memorabilia. New York City teacher Elizabeth Meter spent 60 years collecting items relating to slavery, the fight for civil rights, sports, politics, and the military. Now the 90-year-old is putting the items all up for auction. Guernsey Auction House calls the collection the best of its kind in the world, and I bet the bidding is going to start at a pretty penny, Jenna.
Yeah, just imagine what she's seen in her lifetime.
Pretty amazing.
Yeah. Well, that's going to do it for Faith Nation tonight.
Have a great night. Hope to see you tomorrow.